What's the opportunity for society?
I think most people now have accepted that there is a value in data.
For me, it's about how we can shape a place.
What makes Wigan Council a place where there's impact today from the perspective of being an individual, a citizen living there, or an entrepreneur, anyone really?
Yeah, so Wigan is a really proud place. And we're not just Wigan. It's probably really important for me to say this because we're 14 different towns that make up the borough of Wigan. And we've got Wigan in the second biggest town within the borough. After that is Leigh. And there's significant rivalry between the two towns, it's probably fair to say, partly based on sporting heritage because of the two rugby teams. So that creates a really interesting dynamic. But what really shines through about Wigan and what makes it a place is the proudness of people that come from each of the part of the borough that they come from. What that means in reality is people really believe in their areas, they're committed to them, and they really want to see them do well. So when we're thinking about if we need help from community groups or business organisations to achieve some of our goals, there's always people there in the background waiting to do that. And that's through some of the community groups and voluntary organisations that we've got, through the partnerships that we have with the NHS and the other government organisations, and through to the businesses. So the businesses are often there putting their money into community-based regeneration and schemes to actually deliver change on the ground. And I think that also makes it a really special place.
Ben, I want to dive into open data. What's the opportunity for those of us who are not very familiar with the subject? What's the opportunity for society? And in the context of cities in which you specialize, how are you approaching this? How is the word / the ODI approaching this?
Yeah, so I think open data is a really interesting part of its trajectory. So when the ODI was founded in 2012, open data was kind of really starting to hit kind of, I guess, the mainstream, or at least the mainstream within governments, within organizations. So there was at that point this kind of noble belief that all we needed was to get this information out in the open. This was at a similar time in the UK to the expenses scandal. So when it was found that MPs were kind of putting on their government expenses things like kind of duck ponds, hotels and takeaways and a whole load of things that really they shouldn't. So kind of general trust in the government was at a kind of, I don't want to say all-time low, but it went pretty low. So data and transparency of information was seen as one of the kind of antidotes to this. I think since then, there's been a lot of investment in getting data out in the open. Kind of most governments, assist governments now, have some form of open data portal or platform that they put their information out on. I think we're in the next stage now of people are realizing that just putting data out into the open on these platforms with very little context or with much kind of intended purpose other than to get it on. So it's quite a few years ago now, but as part of this big open data push, lots of the government departments were set targets of you must get however many hundreds, thousands of data sets onto a portal by the end of the quarter or the end of the year. So the target was about volume, and speaking to people who were in these government departments at the time, they were putting a whole load of rubbish out there because all that mattered to the people setting these targets was to hit the number of 3,000 data sets made open in a year. Didn't matter what for, what they contained. So that kind of, I think that energy has carried on in terms of, oh, we just need to get things out in the open and that's our job. So like I was saying, I think the phase that we're in now is actually more about the purpose of the data, why we need to have an actual reason for sharing this data. And sometimes you might not know what that purpose is, but you might know that the data that you're sharing is of value. But when you're putting stuff openly, you need to then be thinking about who you anticipate to be using it. So I think that's where the interesting work is I think most people now have accepted that there is a value in data, but I think it's about convincing people that that value is about data being shared and accessed by the people who can make kind of beneficial things from it. So loads of apps, loads of services, loads of different kind of community groups, loads of legal cases, etc., are all now built on a backbone of data and information. And I think that will continue. I think it's just particularly as governments are cutting budgets, there needs to be a more direct line between data being shared and some idea of the intended and the actual impact.
Aidan, how about place making in Wigan? How are you tackling this?
So I think placemaking is
Or maybe, excuse me, should we start with sharing with people listening to us what placemaking is?
Yes, a placemaking for me, and probably everyone will have a different view on this, but for me, it's about how we can shape a place which is then going to be of most benefit to the people that use it. If you're not doing that, then the place is going to fail and then you won't have successful placemaking. So you really need to understand the context of what you're trying to achieve. And that relates to what uses you're looking to bring in or change or influence into an area. And then think about who's going to be using those spaces. So if you understand all of that context, and that's quite a difficult thing to do. So to be able to do that, you need to have quite a rich data set to kind of inform what that placemaking is going to be. So an example of that we've been doing in Wigan over the last few years is about our town centre, thinking about how trends have changed, how shopping habits have changed, and how people coming into our town centre was diminishing. And then thinking about some of our retail space that we had within the town and thinking where the vacancy rates are up, the actual income that we're getting from our council tax and our business rates is down. So we took a bold decision using that kind of data-led approach to buy that shopping centre that was failing. We then have now knocked it down and we're in the process of rebuilding. And that rebuilding is going to have a whole range of different uses for the town instead. So there will be some retail in there because we're replacing our traditional market. So that will complement the rest of the existing town centre. We're then thinking about what are the trends of why people come into towns and cities, and actually thinking about that leisure-based activity and bringing that to the forefront of the uses that we're putting back into the town. And then thinking about what's going to sustain the town, and it's people that do that now. So we've got a large amount of residential town centre as part of that development and spreading out to the rest of the town now through more commercial developments that are coming forward. So all of that is changing the shape of the town to really think about what people want and delivering what people want. And if you do that, for me, that's what good place shaping is.
Ben, from the perspective of contributing into the future of cities, open data, what do you think is the next agenda? If you had to draft it, how would you draft it?
So I think there's a few ways of looking at this, but I think we've probably all noticed the trend that's been happening over the last, I want to say 4 years, of a refocus on citizens. And I use citizens in the non-legal definition, citizens as people who live or visit or stay in cities. I think city governments are putting an increased emphasis on building some of that trust back with their citizens. And I think we're seeing that with some of the projects. So at the ODI, we work on something called participatory data. So that's kind of forming ways of people to be involved in either sharing data or involved in the decisions that's made about them with data. So taking part in the kind of governance and stewardship of that data as well. I think I expect, or I hope to see a further kind of closing of that gap between states and governments and between citizens. And I think data and contributing things like I said before, the lots of governments are cutting costs now. There's a big focus on efficiency. I think citizens and kind of composites of citizens with things like community groups have a lot to contribute to how cities function, and a lot of data and information and knowledge that they could contribute. So there's been a whole load of projects in things like citizen science, so giving citizens air pollution monitors that they can keep in their homes or on their windowsills. And I think at the moment, we're still not particularly good at bringing that type of information and knowledge, and the knowledge that people have of living in cities, of I know this street is busier, or I know that pollution is bad on days that it's cloudy, or all of this like lived experience from the people who live, work, travel in cities. And I think it's finding ways of taking all of that knowledge up to the people working within cities and who have worked in cities for many years, and finding ways of using both data and that other form of knowledge and intelligence, and finding ways of bringing it together. I don't think it's easy, but I think adding more kind of richness and deeper and thicker knowledge to how we use data is one of the ways that I hope things go.
Can I just add to that?
Indeed,
Because
indeed.
that's just something which we're grappling with in Wigan at the moment. We're thinking about a couple of things and how we really transform our organisation, partly to address some of our budget challenges, but partly to really understand what our communities want. And we're looking at how we can shift some of that power and control that traditionally sits with government organisations like ours to understand what our communities are really saying. And just hearing what you're saying there about some of that really local and pinpointed data collection is something which we really want to get into. We've got a few pilots that are going on in parts of our borough at the moment, which is about how could we change how we're delivering services. So instead of us doing to our communities, actually we shift that power balance so they have a bit more control in it, so they can deliver, and we can learn a lot from them because they have so much more on the ground knowledge than we can have as a pool of officers, and our elected members can only go so far, and there aren't very many of them in the grand scheme of things. So giving that power back to communities and then really listening to them properly and understanding what they're talking about is what we're then going to use to shape how we deliver services.
For sure. I think control and power are really interesting things to talk about as well. So as I was saying, there is this focus that's been placed on kind of making cities work for citizens, of kind of citizen-led smart cities and stuff, for example. But there's this approach called the ladder of participation. So I think we need to be skeptical about some of these citizen-led approaches in ensuring that they're not tokenistic. So there are many projects where they say, oh, this was citizen-led. We ran one focus group, we heard some things, and then we went and did what we were going to do anyway. That's not about kind of giving power and control to citizens. That's about kind of extracting information from them, using the kind of look of we're engaging with our citizens without actually following through and giving actual power, control, ownership, doing things on like more of like a partnership basis. So I think that's something that we need to be very mindful of, is those relationships and making sure that things like data isn't used in an extractive way, but that's actually reforming the relationships that we have.
Would you have a last word, Aidan?
I think the future is really exciting. We're entering into a new phase of how we can think about how we're shaping our places using the intelligence from a really wide range of data sets in a way that we just haven't done before. And I think if we all get behind that and are committed to it, the future is going to be really bright.
Sure. How about you, Ben?
I think it's about not losing sight of what data is and isn't. So I think data is a tool. It's essentially a very, very useful tool, but it's not the end goal in itself. It needs to always come back to the purpose, making cities better, making livelihoods better, making cities healthier, making them respond to pending climate breakdown. For example, data is one of the ways that we can understand and tackle a problem. And I think we need to make sure that we do it responsibly and we're not making things worse or kind of continuing decades-long power dynamics that have led to lots of these inequalities. I think data can kind of break down some of these barriers, but I think it can also build them higher. So I think we just need to be very deliberate with how we use data, making sure we do it ethically, responsibly, always thinking about the purpose, the impacts, who it might benefit, who it might harm.
Great. Thank you. I'm very grateful for your time and for your insights shared in this podcast. Thank you to each of you who's made this possible, and I hope to see you soon in other episodes, and let's wish this initiative a great future and great success. Thank you.